So good to see you again. I wish I could see you. You know, that's one of the things that is a plus and a minus. Here I am with the capacity to communicate to billions of people, and only a few will watch, but that's okay because we have a different approach than the world has. It's all about hits in the world. It's all about how many followers do you have and so on, how many likes, how many friends, and so on. And we know from experience that even though you might have, as I do, over 600 Facebook friends, very few of them are actual friends who would respond to me. I have a list of people that I email to, and they're much more responsive, and only a smaller subset of those are truly responsive to what I'm saying. And every week I get an email or two from somebody asking a question or making a comment about something that was useful. It's important for us to understand that it is about small numbers. Now, I'm going to give you to start with today, a video that I created that it was based on some of the material that we've had before. And this was done entirely artificially by NotebookLM, which is a Google property. If you have a Google, you go into Chrome and you get your Google account thing there, and you got the little tic-tac-toe thing. If you click on that, it pops up. It's got maybe the ones you use, Gmail or Docs, or in my case, what I use is Google Slides. But down there, you'll get a black and white logo with some curves on it that says LM. You want to give that a try. This is what it turns out. I just uploaded a piece of text, something that I can't even remember now, that I'd written from a chapter or something that we did. And this is what it came out as.
Let's dive into one of the most famous stories in history, but we're going to look at it from a totally different angle. Pure strategy. Seriously, we're setting aside theology for a minute, just to analyze the method behind the movement. So what was the master plan? Well, the answer is not at all what you'd expect. Okay, so to get started, we have to deal with this central paradox. Because if we were to judge Jesus' 3-year ministry by the metrics we use today, followers, engagement, conversion rates, it honestly might not look like a runaway success at all. In fact, if you just look at the numbers, it looks kind of small. Get a load of this number, 120. After 3 years of teaching and performing miracles that drew these massive crowds, how many core followers were there at Pentecost? Just 120 people. That's it. It's a shockingly small number when you think about it.
And to give that a little more context, the source material points out that only about 500 people in total saw him after the resurrection. Now, even being generous, that's a group you could fit into a small theater. After 3 years of nonstop work, that was the grand total.
So this forces us to ask a pretty blunt question, right? If you were a consultant just looking at the raw data, would you call this a successful campaign? The numbers just don't seem to add up. And that is the central puzzle we've got to solve. What in the world was really going on here?
All right, so the key to understanding this whole strategy, it doesn't lie with the crowds. It lies with a very small, very select group of people. So let's take a look at the actual guys who were chosen to carry this entire mission forward.
And this slide, wow, it reveals a fascinating contrast. I mean, by the world standards, these guys were a terrible pick. Uneducated, prejudiced, just common laborers. But see, Jesus wasn't looking for credentials. He was looking for character. He picked guys who were teachable, who were honest, who were just hungry for something more. And this just hammers the point home. Look at this list. These weren't scholars or politicians or, the influencers of their day. They were fishermen, laborers. They had zero formal training for the world-changing mission they were about to be handed. So, why them? This choice was clearly 100% deliberate. And this brings us right to the core of the method, a strategy of intense, deliberate focus. Instead of trying to broadcast his message as widely as possible, which he could have done, Jesus did the complete opposite. He narrowed his attention from the many to the few. So he started here, right, with the multitudes. He preached to them, he healed them, he even fed them. He absolutely ministered to the crowds, and they loved him for it. But, and this is the key, they weren't the end game. From those huge crowds, the strategy narrowed. He picked out just 12 men. And suddenly, they got special access, unique responsibilities, and a much, much deeper level of teaching. The focus was already getting a lot sharper.
And then, get this, even within that group of 12, he focused his attention even further on an inner circle of just 3, Peter, James, and John. These were the guys brought into the most critical, private moments, like the Transfiguration. This wasn't favoritism, it was pure strategy.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's actually a pretty simple principle of leadership when you think about it. You can achieve so much more depth with a small, focused group than you ever could just shouting at a huge crowd. He was investing his time where it would have the biggest long-term impact.
Now, this strategy also meant he had to actively fight against something that most leaders would kill for: popularity. I mean, the crowds were ready to make him a political king right then and there, but that was in direct conflict with his actual purpose.
This quote from our source just nails it. He had mass appeal right in the palm of his hand, and he deliberately chose not to use it for his own gain or for political power. But why?
Well, it's because his mission was so much deeper than that. He wasn't there to be some kind of entertainer or a politician. He refused to just play to the galleries, performing miracles just to impress people. He knew that satisfying the crowd's short-term desire for a political hero would have completely derailed his actual long-term mission.
And that's the bottom line, right there. The goal was never about winning a popularity contest. It was about laying the foundation for a spiritual kingdom. And that's something you just can't build on the fickle emotions of a crowd. It needed a solid foundation of dedicated, deeply trained leaders.
So now, finally, we can see the strategic genius behind what looked on the surface like a failure. It was never about simple addition. It was about multiplication.
See, he knew the masses were like sheep without a shepherd. They needed real guidance. They needed leaders. And his number one strategic priority was to forge those leaders first. Before he could permanently help the world, he had to invest everything into the people who were going to carry on the work.
And this slide, this lays out the entire four-step playbook. It's brilliant. 1. Select a few ordinary but teachable people. 2. Train them deeply, pouring your life and your time into them. 3. Entrust the entire future of the mission to that core group. And then 4, through their work, they would multiply the effort and eventually reach the world. It's just an incredible long-term strategy.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? In our world of viral trends, influencers, and mass marketing, this ancient strategy feels totally backwards. But it forces us to ask, what is the true source of lasting change? Does it really start by trying to win over the masses? Or does it begin by deeply, intentionally investing in a dedicated few?
I have no idea exactly how it did that, but that script was not written by me or any other human. It was written automatically, seeking to condense a chapter or a blog post. I can't even remember what I used for it. The base material. I can go and look it up because it's still there. It's all up there in the cloud, wherever that cloud is, somewhere in that grand computer in the sky. And I think that it captured, with one minuscule exception, it captured the essence of what I was trying to say. The minuscule exception is he said he started with the crowd. No, he didn't. He started where there was a crowd who was following John the Baptist, and then from that he selected just a few at the very beginning before we get to where we're going today. Just as a general framework, we're going here to look at some things about his association with people. And in Mark 3:14, it says he appointed 12 that they might be with him. Now, he said two other things as well in that passage, but we're really looking at the with him part. And what we find is that the way things developed in the Jewish system had the with him attitude to it. We're going to get to that. And the way we're doing things today, we don't have a with him attitude. I was talking with a Bible college student, a couple of them. I asked, how often do the professors come to the lunchroom to eat lunch with you? And the basic answer was very rare, very, very rare. Now, there's something really fundamentally mixed up. I don't want to beat up on all my friends at the Bible colleges, but I want to beat up on the concept. We have developed a concept, and if we do what we've always done, we're going to keep getting the results we've been getting for the last little while. And I can see without question that over the last 2 generations, we have diminished the aspect of association with people and emphasized the idea of the public ministry. Jesus spent time with the feeding of the 5,000 and large groups like that. And he spent a little time with mid-sized groups, synagogue groups, and smaller with the 12 and so on. And he spent time with individuals. But he only spent 1 out of 5 events, according to all the encounters that I can glean from the New Testament, with the large crowd. We like to think about the large crowd because we're crowd-oriented in our minds. Bigger is better. It's not. Jesus had the opportunity when he had got the 5,000 together, which is counting women and children, closer to 15,000 people. He could have said, okay, that's the base. Let's work with that. And he didn't do that. Now, it may have been that a few of his followers came from those large crowd events. Some would argue that they did. I don't argue against that, but it's an argument from silence. But he did not stay there where that ministry happened. He moved on from there. And as the previous video just showed you, he didn't end up with all that many who are really dedicated. Don't be bent out of shape that only about 3% respond. You have to get used to that. That's about the response we would want from people is about the same that Jesus got, was about 3% in the end of the day. You can look it up. And if you don't believe me, I'll even give you a program that'll help you look it up. Now, it's so important that we understand what Jesus was doing and that we should follow in the same train. I'm picking up a lot of what I'm saying from the master plan of evangelism. It became one of my one of my several springboards to understand what Jesus did. It was written a long time ago. And people... Today, it seems to me when I talk to pastor types and church types, they say, well, it's all different today. And they're using what psychologically is called motivated reasoning. They're trying to reason to get to the conclusion that was their prior conclusion, their preconceived notion. And they kind of go to incidents from here and there and look for verses to back up their preconceived notions. That's called motivated reasoning. And I think we've got to stop that. We've got to go back to first principles and ask that question, what did Jesus do? How did he operate? And Coleman made a really good start at it. And quite honestly, I think he missed some points that we'll get to eventually. We're not going to get to them all today. Okay, so Jesus had a simple strategy. He stayed close with his disciples. He associated with them on about half of the episodes that are in the New Testament that are encounters with Jesus face-to-face with individuals, small groups or large groups. His disciples were there watching his 12. How did he train the 12? We went through the training of the 12 before and went through all the chapters. And Bruce didn't emphasize this as much as I think he should have. The disciples were there and they were mostly trained by watching, by observing how Jesus occupied them. His presence was at the classroom. He didn't have a classroom, never used a classroom. There was no formal school or curriculum. And I would argue today that the last 100 years or so, we developed a formalized, ivy-covered halls attitude towards education. And I just ask, how's that been working for us? We've seen the size of the church and its impact in North America diminish radically. When my parents were married in 1928, a long time ago now, the Canadian information was that about 1 out of 4 people were associated with an evangelical church. When Wendy and I were married in 1968, 40 years later, we had moved that ratio from 1 in 4 down to 12%, whatever that is, of the total. Is it 1 in 8, I think, something in that neighborhood. And I would say that, what am I trying to say? Anyway, we had 25% back then. We have 12% when Wendy and I got married. When our oldest daughter was married, Sarah, who's director of Canada's Walk Through the Bible, and you should get in touch with her and get her to set up a walkthrough in your church. It's a magnificent ministry. We're down to about 3%. So if what we've been doing isn't working, horse is dead, dismount. Don't keep flogging it. horse is dead. And we need to develop a different attitude that's more like what the first century Jews did, but then an enhancement on that, what Jesus did as well. Jesus was the lesson. Just by being there, by people watching him and seeing how he operated, did well. There was no formal training needed. There was no structured courses or seminary. There were no rituals or required formulas. They just walked with him every day. And I've said several times, and I'll say it again, there was a lot of walk and talk time with them side by side, walking down the road. So that eventually, after about a year or a year and a half, perhaps, there were a dozen that were with him when he was on his mission trips every day. They probably didn't go out for maybe more than a month and then back home and so on. We're not sure about that schedule. But his method of working with people was to be with them. Last week we looked at the first training retreat that he had was just a few days. But his methodology was to get them apart from where they were normally occupied so they could focus and concentrate on living with him. Now, in the New Testament era, the Jewish pattern had to raise up a rabbi, had, I see him off the screen there a bit, oops. It was like Christian school, if you would. It was Jewish school. They'd have, in stage one, the kid would go to school from ages 5 through 10. He'd start, and he'd have religious training. We've given up on religious training because we gave up education to the secular system. But on the side, we had a strong Sunday school movement that was started by Robert Raikes in England way back in the 1800s to buoy up the Christian education part of it. Raikes started with just training them anything and everything. But that became the Sunday school movement, which was very strong, but it isolated the training of children away from the family much more so. Where here in the New Testament time, they'd go to a small meeting place, and it was called the House of the Book. Then stage 2, when they got 10 to up to 13, they went to the House of Learning. That's when they dig down deep, and then with the only vestige that really remains in our mind today is at age 13, they had their bar mitzvah, where they became a true son of the covenant. And then they would start to evaluate as to which ones were suited to be the future rabbis. That was very important, that they were watching these kids as they lived. And so in stage 4, only the very best that had been trained in the schools were invited to become disciple training in the Talmud. And that was a long time training of about 15 years. They traveled with the rabbis. There were rules. They had to leave their wives for more than 30 days. They had to get special permission. And they traveled with the rabbi in the hopes that someday they would replicate the rabbi and become as good as the rabbi. Jesus said, no, that's not the standard. My standard is I want you to do even greater works than what I've done. Mind-boggling. Now, there was a trade required of these Jewish kids coming up, and they'd be there from teenage up to about age 30 before they actually were on their own. That's about when Jesus started his ministry, wasn't it? They were required to learn a trade. There was no paycheck to be a rabbi. That's very important. We have, in our seminary and Bible school attitude, we say, go to Bible school and you'll get a job at the end, meaning you'll get a paycheck at the end. Now, you could get a job, but you couldn't get a paycheck back in then. They depended on the hospitality of the people around them in their whole context. So there was no formal training program, even in that way, in terms of schoolroom training, beyond the first few teenage years. It was all walk and talk, get out there, do the carpentry, do the surveying, do whatever other trades there were. You had to learn that, and you had to get good at it in order to be seen as a formal rabbi at about the age of 30. That's how they did it then. And Jesus picked up on some of that and not some of the other. He didn't emphasize. We see no evidence that he was emphasizing working with the children or the teenagers, although my hunch is that the disciples were much younger than we would normally think of them. We don't know that for a fact. It's just my hunch. So that was kind of the pattern they were in. The knowledge for these people who were going to be the ones who would change the world came through associating with Jesus. Being with him was what came first. Understanding followed that relationship. And so they kind of, we'd say, sit around and chew the fat. And it was the dialogue. It was going back and forth. I can't even remember what question I promised some people that I would answer today. Totally forgot. It's just gone. Sorry, folks, if you were expecting an answer, you'll have to email me and I'll get you that answer. Jesus was teaching them the secrets of the kingdom. He wasn't focusing in on a narrow personal salvation. He was focusing in on how are we going to transform this society for now, and in due course have every knee bowing and every tongue confessing that Jesus is Lord. That's the way Paul put it. It was his presence. It was being with him, who he was, not what he purported to be, not with his shiny, polished up persona, which is what we develop today. You know, we dress up the way we're supposed to dress up. It used to be that you had to wear a suit, a tie, and some people say you still should wear a suit and tie. That's how you show respect. And then the really cool guys say, well, you should have those very expensive running shoes. I don't get that at all. And, ripped knees in your jeans so you can be cool and identify with the society. I don't care. One way or the other is okay with me if you're doing the right things. I don't think that there's anything evil about either side of that spectrum, really, that people are involved with, as long as it gives you the opportunity to open the door to relationships. Anyway, the invitation that Jesus gave, and he always gave an invitation, they didn't all come because of the invitation. Some came to him on their own. It was, come and see, follow me. Just very simple. And, Coleman makes the point that a sermon beats an explanation. I'm not convinced that the sermon, frankly, beats anything. I think that the call to action is what is necessary. I think that it's probably multiple calls to action. Just go back a bit and cover some things we've covered before. When John the Baptist is out doing his ministry and Jesus has a few people who follow him there, one of them, not named, but undoubtedly it's John. Later on, perhaps a year or a year and a half into the ministry, Jesus is walking by the sea and he says to James and John, follow me. And, John was already probably in on it, probably had talked to his brother James. We don't know the details of how that happened, but what that would indicate to me is when you say follow me once, you don't give up. You keep on going. When you say come and see to somebody, you don't give up. Sometimes it takes as many as maybe 30 hits where you give people the opportunity before they're in need and decide to respond. When you say come and see, I'd like to invite you to my church is the famous sentence that I perpetuate. I would like to invite you to my church, and stop talking, see where the conversation goes, and then maybe a few weeks or months later, someone else in your church, if they're following the plan, will say, I'd like to invite you to my church. And then another guy will say, I'd like to invite you to my church. That person is going to think everybody goes to your church if they hear it 3 or 4 times in a row, and they might just respond to the fourth person when you were the first person. Don't try and figure it out. Give them the opportunity. Don't try and persuade them at that point in time. Just give them the chance. And then when they'll ponder it, the Holy Spirit will bring the information to their mind, because it's his job to convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. And they'll be convicted, and they'll respond sometimes. And when they respond, usually it's because they're in some kind of a life change crisis, or something has hit them and scared them. There's something going on that jarred them out of their sameness, and where they said, you know what, I should give that a try. Maybe an awareness that they don't have the friends. It could be, in fact, somebody breaking a relationship with them. It could be a loss of job. It could be a car accident. It could be health. It could be any number of things that wake people up. But the base of you saying, come and see, come and see, come and see. When they ask you, oh, well, what's your church like? Just say, the best thing to do is just come and see. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And if you don't like it, you don't have to come back a second time. Your job, once you get them there the first time, is to get them there the second time, and so on. That's a whole process of fishing that is net fishing. It's not sport fishing. It's not like going out there and sitting on the dock and throwing a rod in a nice sunny day and reeling it back in. If you catch a fish, nice. If you don't catch a fish, it's okay. Somebody else caught a fish on the dock. No. This was their livelihood. This was everything to them. And every day in commercial fishing is not a good day. Ask any commercial fisherman about that. And the weather's bad, and the storms came up on the Sea of Galilee, and they knew that fishing was going to be tough work. But it was always just a simple invitation. Follow me, and I'll turn you into fishing for people. 4, 5, maybe even more of the first people that he called were these tradesmen that were stinky fishermen. He just took ordinary people and made extraordinary work out of them. Jesus chose these people to be with him, Mark 3:14. He wanted them to be with him. His presence came much before his preaching. His preaching was only 1 out of 5 of the events in the New Testament had anything to do with preaching. The other 4 had to do with conversation, and 2/3 of those had to do with dialogue. Whoops, maybe that was the answer to the question. I can't remember what I asked. If I didn't ask that question last week, I'll ask it next week in the email that goes out. And by the way, if you want to join the email list, just let me know, and we'll get you on that list so that give you a little few clues in the email that comes out every Thursday morning. I know that life is hectic for you, and I hope that you will come every Thursday at 10 o'clock. I know most of you won't, and it's okay. The people that you invite, you give them the opportunity, and maybe later they'll come. For now, it's all up there on the internet. Maybe that'll change. Who knows? We don't know what the future will hold. You've got to expect the unexpected in life, and there's going to be a lot of unexpected things that happen. So it was being near and around Jesus that was preparing them for their ministry. It wasn't formal education. It wasn't even the teaching sessions. There were teaching sessions, and he concentrated more and more as he got down to the last week. And you see what John recorded for us magnificently, and from John 13 and up to 17, that none of the other gospel writers captured. You can see that Jesus did teach them some information, but didn't teach them the kinds of things that we teach today. I do. Don't get me going. We need to do what Jesus did. We need to teach what Jesus taught. Let's start that as a base. And then if we get around to other stuff like, I don't know, the church administration and so on, I'm all for it. But it's secondary stuff. As time went by, it would appear that Jesus spent more time with the 12, even though he spent lots of time with other people as well. His time with the 12 and even the 3 within the 12 was his very deliberate strategy. It meant that he didn't have the time for personal stuff. He had the time to be with people. And these disciples watched him encountering other people. They heard the conversation that he had, the complete conversation, the one that I'm always fascinated by, that the woman who came and touched the hem of his garment had been bleeding for a dozen years. And he turned his attention, even though there was a crowd pressing it on him, he turned his attention to that one person and handled that interruption. That's how Jesus operated. He was glad to handle interruptions. Oh, we'll get to that more so as we go. There's so many lessons that we have to learn from him as we go along here. The learning happened as he went alongside of the work. Jesus didn't guard any personal time. He went off by himself to pray at times, but the disciples were always there around him as he traveled, and they probably went home for, a month and then on the road for a month again. We don't know the details of that, but they probably maintained their connection with their homes. We don't know if they had wives and children. We know Peter had a wife because he had a mother-in-law, and we can assume that anybody who had a spouse probably had children as well. But these 12 that he chose were his spiritual children. He extended his care far out from beyond the 12 because he was being an example of fishing for others. And people came to him, and others joined his traveling group, and we don't know how many. But we do know that his personal care for individuals was an example for the disciples, and they followed his example. Now, the church has got to change its attitude. Preaching alone cannot develop leaders. That's what Coleman said. He got paid to train preachers, so there was that. I'm not convinced that preaching at all develops leaders. Well, it does somewhat, but only by the example of the preacher, not so much the content. You got to be present. Why build classrooms? Put money into travel expenses, into hotel rooms where you can go from this town to that town. My goodness, we've built all these magnificent buildings, and they're not of primary use. The classroom needs to be out where the people are, in the breakfast room at the Best Western Hotel, perhaps, something like that. The people who are going to follow need to be willing to leave their nets in what was a regular pattern and spend time out there following. And pastors need to take people with them wherever they go. Your disciples have to be raised by you. And stay with them and stay on their case when they fail, but encourage them when they don't. I think that, I say it's 5 carrots to 1 stick. It's the idea that they need a lot of encouragement before you beat them up for messing up on something. We're not following up. We haven't been following up since 1963 when Coleman wrote the book. Half of the converts that we have drift off because we don't follow up on them. And even those that stay, very few grow into leadership. It's one of the number one problems. When I ask pastors, what's the biggest challenge you face in your church? The number one thing that rises to the top is raising up leaders. And that's what the Breakthrough Pathway system is supposed to start them on their way, and we'll take them on their way, and we'll get them through there over time. It'll be more than that book, but it starts with that book. Weekly classes are not enough, and in the case of Breakthrough Pathways, even starting once a month to filter down to the people you can work with. You got to take care of these people personally, but you can't take care of too many, so you have to filter them out until you find the people who are serious. Every believer needs somebody to be in front of them, some sponsor, someone who will answer their questions, walk them through the problems. And there are the simple problems, 3 weeks into the thing, they've come to your church and they see people collecting the offering, they're putting envelopes. They say, where do I get a set of offering envelopes? They need somebody to ask, and they're not going to walk up to some welcome center. They don't do that. They're going to ask a friend, and if their friend happens to be on the welcome center that day, then they'll ask, and then we'll say, well, the welcome center worked. No, it was the friendship that worked. You train the leaders by following the leaders. So what? So what are we going to do? Well, if you're going to follow Jesus, you got to get yourself out there. If you want to walk in the water, you got to start getting out of the boat. Get out from behind your computer screen and hiding and doom scrolling through all kinds of stuff, pretending you're learning. And schedule X. I'm not going to tell you what X is. Hours a week for individuals. Why am I not going to tell you that? Because if you're going to be the typical person, the ordinary person in ministry, you're going to have both a what we would call a secular job and your ministry job. And many people, about a quarter in North America, don't get paid for their ministry job. Hey, no rabbis got paid, so don't feel sorry for yourself. But schedule in your mind that I'm going to spend time this week, and I think that working on a weekly schedule is a good idea, to say that Wednesday afternoon or whatever you choose is when I'm going to spend some time with some individuals. Spend wide numbers of hours with small groups. Now, the small group isn't just a typically formal small groups, although it could be that in your church, but 2 or 3 or 4 people. I think that the concept of a triad is a very powerful thing, where you take a couple of people, you have that small group, and you meet every Tuesday at 10 o'clock for coffee at Tim Hortons. I'm a Canadian. At Tim Hortons. Starbucks, no, that's $4. But I don't care. Meet in somebody's home, meet in a park. Do whatever it is. But schedule your life as best you can to say, I need to set that up. And sometimes you have to make appointments to make those things happen, and sometimes they'll happen spontaneously. And that's where we get to scheduling Z hours a week for that which is unscheduled, that which just happens when somebody knocks on your door in one way or another, sends you a text, asks a question or whatever. You've got time. You must have time for individuals. You cannot say, I'd love to spend time with you, but I'm just so busy this week because I got these projects. You know what? Your projects are all going to wait. They're going to be there next week, but that individual may never come back. So make sure that you handle interruptions and handle them well. So you've got to develop your relationships with people. Yes, you got to know the word. Yes, you got to know a lot of things. You got to know the culture. You got to know the society, but you've got to develop relationally with people. And you work with a crowd. Jesus did work with a crowd, and identify those who are more responsive. Induce people to come to you, to ask questions. And then when they come, be present with the individual. Don't check your watch. Who carries a watch? Well, an Apple Watch. Take this sucker and put it face down. Doesn't matter if it rings. The phone does not interrupt except in emergencies. It does not interrupt your time in the restaurant with that person. Be present. Be intentional. Remember what they said. Remember what they're thinking about. Remember what their problems are. Now, I just want to finish up with a couple of things here. You may have heard of the 1040 window if you haven't looked it up. You may have heard of the 414 window. That's when most people are coming to Christ. I'm advocating for the 14 to 24 window, which is more like what they did in the Talmud training in the New Testament time of the Jews. I believe that's the vulnerable decade, and that's when people make major decisions in life. And we need to take our emphasis not from after high school, but from all along the way, in every way that we go. Begin now. Be intentional. X, Y, Z. Go back and look at that. It's time with individuals, time with small groups, unscheduled time, and you will make a huge difference over time. It won't happen in the first week, but over time, people will get to know you. They'll get to understand that you're worth getting to know. They will start coming to you with questions. It will take some time before they trust you, but do it, and you will find that God does a wonderful work through you. So much more to say. Catch you next week with it.